Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a very special Colonel Yinsa. We're incredibly lucky to have the one and only Isaac with us. Isaac has done a great deal of shadowy supercoder work across the ecosystem. He's been involved with everybody from Maker to Moloch, now helping the DAOHaus team write minions for Zodiac and various other plug and play modules in the booming decentralized autonomous organizational ecosystem. He's doing any number of cool things, but what we're going to be talking about today is Onchain Archaeology, the work that he did for our dear friends Bear and Sparrow and the people at DADA and the Invisible Economy to rescue some NFT contracts that they had written in 2017. So you definitely don't need to hear more from me. We're just incredibly grateful that you're willing to give us your time. Isaac, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Isaac will tell us a little bit of the story and how it all played out. And after that, as is the case with every good Colonel Yunso, we will open it up for comments, jokes, questions, and other tangents. So, Isaac.
Great.
The floor is yours.
Thanks for the welcome. And yeah, please give me a heads up if things start getting spotty. I'm actually traveling this week with the DADA folks. We're at this like NFT building multi-week thing. So we're doing a lot of cool projects here, which I'll be happy to share some more about soon. But yeah, today we'll be talking about the Creeps and Weirdos rescue mission. So the Creeps and Weirdos were this collection of crypto art. Are this collection of crypto art from around October 2017, around pretty much exactly 4 years ago. So they came out just after CryptoPunks and just before some of the standards starting being written. And it was from the DADA art community, and the DADA, they explain what they do better than I do, but to my understanding, they've got this large artist community that's been operating for almost a decade now, if not longer. And doing this digital art where they have these conversations with each other through art. So these drawings that you can see on here are actually the result of these visual conversations between artists. Let's see. Yep, thanks for posting the link to them. So these are all different drawings from different artists in their collection. This was specifically the Creeps and Weirdos collection because it came out around Halloween time 2017. And it's a very interesting contract standard. So it's not quite an ERC20, it's not quite an ERC 721. It's almost actually closer to an 1155 because each of these 108 drawings had a different number of editions or prints. So it's not an 1155 because they're not interchangeable with each other, like each one is a unique print ID, but it is in the sense that there are 108 different drawings or tokens, each with a variable number of prints. Some are ultra rare, some of them are more common. They range from having just a few printed to having up to 200. So this contract was released. It got some attention early on. I think there were a total of 15,000 prints, and I think that around 700 or so sold to just like early crypto art collectors and just people in the community. But after a period of time, they decided just to pause the contract. So the contract was paused. Nothing else could be sold. No one could move their tokens. And then with all of the NFT resurgence that was happening in spring and summer of this year, they were motivated to try to bring this back, but to do it in a fair way. The risk that they've seen when they were trying to revive some of their other crypto art projects were there would be these things that they term ape storms, like storms of apes and bots that would come in and see, oh, this is an old project. I'm going to buy all of this up because it was released years ago, and some of these things are listed for free or for like 0.001 ETH or something. Like people would recognize the significance of the collection and try to get them and buy up the supplies and flip them. So one of the key things was we want to unpause this contract, relaunch this to the community, but do it in such a way that it doesn't just create a big payday for a bunch of bots. So what is our mission? One is that DADA didn't even have a reserve of one of each drawing in their collection. They didn't, so one of the goals was just for the preservation of the art, they wanted to ideally retrieve one or up to 5 full sets of drawings. So that means one print of each 108 drawings. If we managed to do that, we would also like to see if we could rescue them from the initial contract and then relaunch them in a fair way. So these were initially just on sale through the contract, and there was a function where you could buy them at the initial list price. There was no caps, there was no reserves, there was no whitelists or anything like that. So we wanted to get the tokens out of that early 2017 contract and do a new fair launch for supporters and collectors and the general public. Additionally, there were some collectors of later editions, some work from 2019 that they wanted to reward by allowing them to like swap some of their later artwork for an earlier 2017 edition. So this is the state of the mission as it was presented to me after a couple of calls. The first thing that happened was actually just Austin Griffith from Build Guild and Scaffold ETH. He posted in like a Telegram group, hey, there's these artists that have this really ambitious but challenging project that they need help with. Anyone interested? And so I love things like that. So got on a call with them. So the first, any questions on kind of the context? Nice. So the first thing to do is in the archaeological process of kind of understanding what works with this 2017 contract, what can we do with it, is just kind of get it into a hard hat test suite. I'll post a link here. I might be able to, I can't right click it while I'm presenting, but I'll share the link to the actual contract in case you all want to poke around. But the first thing that I did was just develop a local test suite, test all the code paths. Just so that I understood, if they unpause this thing, is it even going to behave the way that they think it will? Because there were some assumptions around like some royalties that they had baked in, and I just needed to understand like what exactly are our options here if we were to unpause this contract and try to transfer some tokens out. So first, developed a local test suite, try to test the full code path. On the right-hand side, this is just a screenshot of like a hard hat test suite with the gas reporter plugin, which I love, and also not in this screenshot, but also the Solidity coverage plugin made by Gnosis, which is really useful for just making sure that you have every line and every branch of your code covered. Then I wrote some scripts to configure the. Oh, thanks for posting that. Then I wrote some scripts to understand the to basically make my local environment reflect what's happening on mainnet. I think that some people are recommending this like yarn fork command that's baked into Scaffold ETH, where you can fork mainnet and start playing around with it locally. I probably should look into that more, but basically what I did is I just wrote a bunch of these setup scripts that deploy the contracts locally, bought the 700 or so tokens that were initially bought, paused it, and just kind of got it to this testing state. Also at various phases deployed this same thing on Ropsten and Gurley just to test out my assumptions before doing anything on mainnet. So the main properties that I noted from the analysis of this contract was that one, it's ownable, but it's not transferable. So that really limits what we're able to do regarding like what the owner agent can do if it's just an EOA. It's just a wallet. It's not a contract. We script it in any way, or in a sophisticated way. There's a single paused and unpaused state. It's not granular, so the entire contract either works or nothing works. So there's no way to like unpause and transfer, but not enable purchases. Like it's just all or nothing. Also, all the 15,000 unsold drawings had to be purchased at the initial list price. Everything had a list price ranging from 0 to 0.8 ETH. And there was no way to get them out without actually buying them. So whatever we did, we'd have to purchase the drawing. And then of course, DADA still owned the account, so we could recycle that ETH and repurchase over and over again. But that is just, yet another challenge. Two other things. There's an integrated secondary sales marketplace, fairly similar to CryptoPunks, but this has built-in profit sharing. So based on the spread between the last sold price and the new sold price, there's a 40% share which goes to the artist's DAO. Additionally, one actually really important thing is that there was an internal function that was supposed to be internal. They commented it that it was internal, but it was actually public. And so I initially thought that's deal breaker. This oh no, this is not going to work. But we've actually been able to use that quote vulnerability to our advantage in the marketplace, because what it allows people to do is basically shortcut the profit sharing. So there's now a button on the marketplace. If you go to the DADA marketplace today, where you can say turn off profit sharing, and that's technically using a vulnerability that we discovered, but it's more using it as a feature. So don't panic if you discover things. Sometimes things tend to work out. So what is our plan? I thought through a bunch of different really, I don't know, if the owner had been trouble, we could have done something cool where in one transaction unpauses, transfers, and repauses. Because the main thing that we were trying to avoid is unpausing the contract and having a bunch of bots come in and buy everything up before we can. There was this tension that was what if somebody has already knows what we're going to do, we unpause this contract and suddenly we're screwed, they're all purchased and we can't do anything. So there was a lot of what we did was optimizing for trying to do this secretly, and ideally do it in a way where we can't be front run. But everything goes back to this basic loop where we press play on the contract, we withdraw any ETH that's in there from previous sales. We call this function called alt buy, which it's just a quirk, why it's called alt buy. So not really much to dig in there, but we do as many of these alt buys as we can and then repause it. And so we just do this as many times as we can until we have rescued all 15,000 tokens. Yes, it sounds terribly inefficient. No, I could not think of any other way to do it. Please dig in the contract and tell me if I could have done it better. But this is the best I could come up with. Validated it with as many people as I could, but yeah, what are the risks here? So when it's unpaused, anyone can come in and buy tokens. We have no special privileges. They could buy up all the ones that are 0 ETH. They could buy the expensive ones. Basically, they could get to it before we do. It's going to cost a lot of ETH and gas. I have some estimations coming up on that. And it's also going to cost a lot of ETH for purchases, but like I said, we can at least recycle that ETH over and over again. So the ETH recycler, in this flow, we send ETH to our operator account. We do this batch purchase. Some goes to miners and gets burned, and some gets recycled back to the DADA operator. So we, based on our estimations, yeah, I'll get into estimations in a moment. But each DADA collectible purchase is around 150K gas. That's not that dissimilar. It's a bit more expensive than a normal ERC20 transfer. But when you're trying to ballpark a Solidity gas costs, the minimum you're going to pay is 20,000 gas. So that's that's just I think that's still the baseline. Correct me if I'm wrong, for what a transaction has to cost, unless maybe you do some variable unsetting, burning gas token style. But any additional S-store operation, so anytime you load data into storage, it's going to cost you another approximately 20K gas. It might be 22,000 gas, but if I'm ballparking something and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is probably going to update 5 or 6 state variables, it's going to cost 100 to 120,000 in gas. This was, of course, all summer, which we're still seeing gas price spikes, but this is from Dune Analytics, a graph of what the average gas price was hourly from mid-August to mid-September, which ended up being when we were doing this rescue operation. So we had to time our operation for mainly Friday nights at midnight to 4 a.m. because that's when people were done using Ethereum for the week usually. It's kind of fun to me that gas follows workday patterns. So we would have to we would do this, and then we would do it until the Asian market started waking up and started buying tokens, and then around midday we'd be pretty screwed and have to end for the day. So how much gas is this actually going to cost? And this was one of many times when I said, are you guys sure that this is worth it? Are you sure that we have to spend this much gas? Because I mean, just do the math, 15,000 transfers times 150K gas. And if we were lucky and got to pay 50 Gwei for gas, that's 150 plus ETH that we're burning just on gas, not counting the ETH that we would have to recycle throughout the operation. So I initially got to this number. It ended up being more than this, by the way, because we did not get lucky and pay 50 Gwei gas. But many times throughout, I was like, okay, this is how much this is really going to cost. Are you absolutely sure? Are you absolutely sure? And yes, because like, I mean, this is significant early crypto art. There were people that were coming in and willing to buy an entire set for like multi-hundreds of ETH already. So we're fine, but I still did not really like the idea that this much gas was going to both miners and just being burned, because 1559 was launched just before we started doing this. So if we were to use the full network capacity of Ethereum, like no one's allowed to do any transactions but us, we would take about 37.5 minutes of every single block on Ethereum. It's a lot of time to take over a network. So how do we spread this out over a longer period of time? Also, another cool thing about EIP 1559 was that it raised the gas limit to 30 million, kind of, but any block that has more than 15 million gas in it raises the base price for the next block. Again, I think that's my understanding. I'm not an expert, so tell me. But like anytime that we were using a block that was like packing it with high gas transactions, and the miner was like, okay, there's a lot of demand, I'm going to put 17 million, we're raising the price for ourselves for the next block. So that's also something you have to be careful about when you're doing like super high volume writes on Ethereum. So what is the dark forest? A lot of people refer to like, the Ethereum dark forest where you can get sandwich attack and front run. Basically, if we were to try to put out these things right to the standard mempool, at least this was our assumption going in, that bots would see it and they would see that we were unpausing the contract, and they would go in and try to sneak their transactions in between when we paused, when we unpaused and we repaused again. So this was too risky. We did not like the idea of it being open for any period of time. So thankfully, I learned a bit more about how flashbots work at this time. So got into a group chat with one of the flashbots developers, and was just kind of validating like what I thought I knew about flashbots, and they taught me a lot. Basically, what you can do with flashbots is I can take these I can take these 5 transactions, put them into a bundle, and not broadcast them to the mempool. So don't send them to like Infura, but instead send them directly to this kind of backdoor into the miners. And you can add additional qualifiers if you want. You can say, okay, miner, please include these 5 transactions at the beginning of a block. If this certain condition is met, I will tip you an additional like 0.1 ETH or something. So we actually baked into the contract a tip for the miners that only worked if the transactions were successful. And what this does is like, if you send a transaction that's going to fail to flashbots, they're probably not going to process it because it's not very profitable to them. But what you can do is like, but I mean, the coolest thing is that you can say, I want these 5 transactions to happen in order, and I don't want anyone else sneaking any transactions in unless these all happen in a bundle. And surprisingly, to me, I think 85 or 90% or even more miners on Ethereum run the version of Geth, which allows you to communicate with them directly like this. There's a whole backdoor that I didn't really know existed until I started messing around with it. And it's just cool to see, like, you broadcast a transaction. It's annoying because like you can't look in the mempool and see its status. You just have to broadcast it and wait and see. But at some point, you just might see it show up in a block. Like you didn't see it pending ever, and then it just shows up, and all of your transactions are in the exact order you wanted them, and they're in the exact part of the block you wanted them. It's a pretty crazy feature, and excited to write some more tutorials to help people with that. I did this naive simulation on Ropsten first without flashbots. So I just broadcast all 500, I just unpaused the contract, broadcast all 550 transactions, moved 15,000 tokens just to see how long it would take. I think I got rate limited on Ropsten because it took over 6 hours to actually get them all processed, even though it should have taken less than that. And there were plenty of blocks that were not full, but I think that I was spamming the network, so they did not, they rate limited me for quite a while. Yeah, and the backdoor for flashbots, like that is flashbots. So like that's the cool thing is like you have this back communication channel where you can send them these requests and do it in such a way that you can avoid all the sandwich bots. Something I don't know, which I would appreciate hearing from folks here, is like, do some of the miners that are running flashbots also attack you, or is there any way that, or is there any way to kind of get around that? Because to me, that seems like that would still kind of be possible. But I don't know, maybe MEV Geth doesn't let you do that. I also did so Gurley, the reason I spelled Gurley wrong here, but the reason I did it on there is because that's the testnet that Flashbots uses. So they don't, at least at the time in August, they didn't have something on Ropsten or Rinkeby or anything. So this was really cool to see. You can see it's probably hard to read, but this is all in block number 5309092. And these 3 transactions happened right in a row in the same block. And then this next one I was showing that like the contract did get paused and my simulated attack failed. So this was my first successful Flashbots bundle on the Gurley testnet, which was very satisfying to see. Now we needed to figure out when we actually did this because gas prices were hovering around like 30 to 100, sometimes spiking up to 400 for many parts of the day. So I think this chart might be a gas now chart. Just pulled this from a Telegram chat I had, but this is just showing like around when is gas usually lowest. So you don't want to be doing things on Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays, but Saturday night, Friday night, sometimes Sunday night, you can get away with getting some lower gas prices. So a lot of this mission, like if gas was reasonable, we could have done this a lot quicker, but we had a goal to try to keep our prices under 50 Gwei, which we were not able to abide by. So here's some snapshots from our Telegram group when we had the first 25 rescued. So this is our first batch transfer thing, which was included as part of a Flashbots bundle. And it was just incredibly satisfying to see, even though I don't know if you can see on here exactly how much, no, it doesn't show on here exactly how much gas we paid, but these transactions were costing us around like 0.2 to 0.5 ETH each. And we had to do hundreds of them. And then throughout the night, I would be just kind of checking in, like, okay, round 3 done, round 4 done. Oh yeah, because we split these into priority rounds because we were worried about what are the absolute top priority things to rescue, and it was one of each of so that the reserve gets it. And then the DADA folks like made this whole table which showed like, okay, if you get past round 1, then these are the ones to get. And if you get past round 2, then these are the ones to get. And I don't have a whole lot of info in here on how I structured that rescue contract. But basically how it worked is I programmed into the contract what rounds had what goals for how many of each drawing. And then I wanted to make it as simple as like, I didn't want to manage any state besides what round we're executing. I didn't want to be like looking at a spreadsheet throughout this entire time. So it's just like an execute call in the contract. So you would just call execute, 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 and the contract would iterate itself through the lists until it rescued the proper amount. A bit more gas heavy, but I thought like more efficient operationally. So here's a screenshot of like also from Dune around like when we did these rescues. So I wanted to get them all done in that first weekend in August around the 22nd. But I mean, and if I could see this chart into the future, I would have prioritized, I think, more getting them done on that first weekend, because you can see how the average just crept up over the course of that month or those few weeks. So that first day, you see that little blip where, okay, we rescued some, and then gas went up for a little bit and we saw a dip. So we're like, okay, let's rescue another 1,000. And then we had about a week of waiting until the next Friday night. And after which we saw that first big spike and probably an art blocks drop or something. So after that big spike, we took advantage of that to rescue a few more, waited a few days, rescued a few more. And then at the end, we were getting closer and closer to the date when we were supposed to have the actual pre-sale for the drawings live. And we got a little bit more desperate and I think we ended up paying around at 80 GWE average on 80 GWE average on those last few days. So this is what it looks like to burn a lot of ETH. And then we had the public sale. So again, focus this more on like kind of the rescue part. Happy to go in the future or feel free to DM if you're curious about any other parts of the ecosystem. But basically all the tokens went into a reserve that had this standard interface that allowed the admin to access all the 2017 methods. So from that reserve, we could create a new sale contract. We could create like these token swap contracts. We could create these like universal bid contracts. Like we have all these now adapters that make the marketplace more useful. And that's all, but all the tokens that we rescued can stay in the reserve until they're in their purchase. So thankfully don't have to move them except when they're being purchased now. So this is what just a quick screenshot I took of what the marketplace looks like now. So you can actually live or adding much more features frequently around like making it so you can bid on not just one print, but like any print of a specific drawing. Yeah, so I just met the DADA folks over the summer. I didn't know about any of this stuff before, but since then I've just been very fascinated by the whole ecosystem and economy that they've built. So just happy to be a part of it now, and happy to share this mission with you all. Oh, and some tools. So hard hat type chain, solidity coverage, flashbots, tenderly graph. These are all awesome things that I definitely leveled up my skills in throughout this thing. So if you have any questions about that stuff too, feel free to ask.
It's amazing, Isaac. Thank you so much. I have a bunch of questions, but I think that it would be best to hear from some others first.
Sure. Oh, and I see Sparrow in the chat, and she's in like probably the next room. So hi.
Sparrow, it's so wonderful to have you here. We love you. Okay, more questions.
Show a quick view of the kitchen in the castle we're hanging out in right now.
Incredible. If people are feeling shy and don't want to start, the first thing I have, I mean, tons of questions about flashbots and some of the learnings from that. But my first question is actually just, could you discuss just a little bit more about your like mental state and framing when you found the internal bug on that function, which had not been properly implemented, and how you actually got to this place where it has become a feature where you can disable profit sharing in the marketplace? Like, what was that journey actually like? Can you talk just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that was actually not my worst moment of panic throughout this entire thing. That was actually pretty tame. I can talk about some of my more terrifying moments too. But that one was like, I noticed that this contract was not marked internal, but it was called make collectible unavailable for sale. So I thought like, okay, worst case, people can kind of grief the marketplace and mess with it and like take collectibles down that weren't for sale. But thankfully there were some additional checks in there that were like, okay, well, only the owner can call this thing. So I think it was like a function that at some point was perhaps supposed to be public, but somehow made it through. And then so I pretty immediately I had the suspicion that it was an issue. So I mentioned it in the Telegram group, and then just to confirm that, I wrote some tests to see if it behaved the way I did. So from that initial moment where I'm like, oh, this is not supposed to be public, to okay, well, this is the downside. Like, this is what can happen if we launch with this thing. I think I think it was like Shabnam, or I don't remember who in DADA like initially thought like, hey, what if we turn this into a social experiment where people can choose whether or not they want to pay royalties? And I just thought that was like an incredibly cool adaptation. And so that was a pretty okay one. But a few other moments of panic were for about 15 minutes, I thought that after the mission was over, that I had actually locked all of the tokens in an unaccessible contract, because there was like the transfer function had a slightly different interface than I was expecting. So some tests that I wrote started failing. I had to like get up from my computer and like walk around the house and think like, okay, this is ruined. I wasted 150, I wasted 200 ETH in gas, and like no one's gonna hire me to do anything again. And then like had to convince myself to sit down and like really write out the tests to see if I was right or wrong. And the bug was not obvious, so I really thought that I was wrong for a while. And that was not pleasant. So yeah, that was one of the worst moments. The easier moments were actually like we just got into a rhythm when we were sending ETH. Like we were sending hundreds of ETH around like without like barely checking things at some point, just because we got into a rhythm. And in hindsight, that's crazy because we were just like, okay, more ETH here, please. We need to. Okay, send me another 50 grand. I need to like spend some gas. And how like free and loose we were with ETH once like the mission got rolling was kind of crazy.
It's really incredible. Could you, yeah, it's just remarkable, all of the work that has happened, and this particular kind of insights that arises from genuinely understanding and writing proper tests and all of this kind of stuff. Also, before I get into any kind of technical questions about flashbots and some of the things which have come up, the other kind of question that I have, for a lot of people in kernel, and I think that for a lot of developers getting into the ecosystem, these stories are wonderful to hear, but there's like this little kind of caveat in that it's like, I joined the Telegram group that had one of the Flashbot developers in it, or I joined the Telegram group that had this person who had like all of the stuff that he can teach me. Can you talk like a little bit about how you find yourself in those kinds of environments and what kinds of things you do to like get into the right places where this knowledge is freely shared and available, and where you do stand to learn the kind of lessons that you
Yeah, I remember all the steps. So it's I mean, it's not straightforward in hindsight, but it's straightforward in hindsight, but ahead of time, it's all about just kind of putting things out there that you are interested in, that you're building, that you want to see built, and then like seeing who picks up on that. Actually, we talked about that a lot. We're talking about that a lot this whole week about like how do we find people that are just intrinsically motivated and creative and like want to build and solve problems. So the way that you get found doing that is just by putting some work out there. So in my case, the first thing that I built was like I saw Austin's Scaffold ETH build at like one of the ETH Denver hackathons, and I made an app that like was like a simple NFT starter app. Just I thought that'd be a fun use of time. I DM'd it to him on Discord, which don't do that. He only really reads Telegram, so I DM'd it to him on Telegram, and he thought, oh, this is cool. Like, let me invite you. You seem like good at Scaffold. Let me invite you into this because there's a public Scaffold ETH Telegram group. And then he was like, okay, let me invite you to the Build Guild Scaffold group, which is like the big one has 600 people, the small one has like 90. So it's like, okay, now you're among the people that are kind of the elite scaffold builders. And then after doing that and just kind of like when people would have questions in the group, I would just answer a lot of those questions and try to help them debug. And then, I mean, I don't think he has this graduated system set up on purpose. But then I got invited to the like 12-person Telegram group, which is the elite like builders group. And like, so it's just a matter of like being active in there and like showing off your builds, writing documentation, like helping other developers debug. And people will naturally just like say, hey, I've got this project going on, might need your help. Like, can I just add you to this group? And that's how you find yourself like with a direct line of communication with anyone in the ecosystem you would want to talk to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Right. I think I am, if you have questions, please jump in. Feel free to ask about any of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think I see a question from Sid.
Wonderful, Sid, and then we'll come back to Flash.
Yeah, I mean, Andy's asking all the relevant questions. I have a question related to Metapurse. Like, at what point did Metapurse get involved, and what was it like to work with them to facilitate these transactions for the ETH?
So I didn't directly get to. I talked to Tubador on like a Twitter space recently, but with Metapurse and them, it was actually a little bit opaque to me. I think I was still kind of getting to know the DADA folks, and they didn't immediately say that like, hey, Metapurse is coming in and going to give us like 300 ETH for these things. Like, was not known until like a few weeks in after I think they had built up some trust. So once I did learn that, I thought like, okay, well this is really legit. Like this guy is spending like real ETH on this. So better not screw this up. So did not really like interact with them directly, but some of the things that we had to do were like, do a batch transfer of an entire full set of drawings to their wallet, which was kind of fun. Hoping to meet them at Dreamverse next week in NYC. So maybe more stories to come there.
Awesome, thank you.
Incredible. As someone who has spent some time running some tutorials recently in which I speak about everything that is not technical, I was particularly interested in the thought that you might put together some pointers on how to use flashbots. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit more about this surprising backdoor that exists, which most miners run in their Geth clients, and like further potential use cases for this kind of stuff, as well as what you think like a tutorial might look like in that particular realm.
Yeah. So the only thing, so there's really just two differences between doing a normal transaction and a Flashbots transaction. In a normal transaction, you sign one transaction and you broadcast it to your RPC, whether that's Alchemy, Infura, your own node. You just send it out there and then it propagates. In Flashbots, you just sign it one additional time. So you import the Flashbots provider, which is a wrapper for the like the Infura or Alchemy provider. And then you have to just like sign your bundle and then send it to their RPC endpoint. So it doesn't even add a whole lot of code. But the things that you have to know are like how to make your bundle attractive. And to make your bundle attractive, you just have to make sure that it's like you're paying a high effective gas price. So the client that they run, which is MEV Geth or miner extractable value Geth, the naive Geth client, not my expertise, but how I understand it is the naive Geth client just kind of looks at your gas used, it simulates your transaction, it sees how much gas is going to be used, and it multiplies it by your gas price, and it thinks, okay, if I do this, I will earn this much of a tip. MEV Geth takes that one step further, and it also checks like, are there any lines of, are there anything in your code that does like block.coinbase.transfer? And block.coinbase.transfer is an additional tip to the miner outside of your gas price. So if you do block.coinbase.transfer and you do that inside of an if statement, which is like, if my arbitrage transaction was successful, go ahead and tip yourself some extra money. And like they might know, okay, well, for this transaction to be successful, we have to make sure that it goes at the beginning of the block and doesn't get sandwiched because we want to get our additional tip. So it's about calculating your effective gas price, which is like your tip plus your normal gas. And that's what their client is able to understand.
Incredible. I really look forward to this particular tutorial. It bears some strong similarities with what you're talking about in terms of finding something which at first blush seems to be a bug, and then when we actually kind of consider it and look at it from a wider perspective, can have some really, really interesting features. It's part of the joy of these public and adversarial networks is that when looked into with consideration, often that which at first seems to be potentially negative, when consciously integrated into the ways that we work with things, can have all of these like really interesting side effects.
And yeah, that's a very great point. Yeah, that like that's like, I think that's like one of the Flashbots design philosophies where they're like, this is miner extractable value is a part of Ethereum, whether we like it or not. So let's try to use it as a way to like build something cool.
Absolutely right. And it sort of takes me into like just a brief detour away from some of the code and into like this notion of an invisible economy. That there's so much stuff going on which is not necessarily that visible to us, and yet indelibly inked into the chain if we have the creativity and the capacity to go back and find it and do interesting things with it. So can you speak just a little bit more about your interaction with the invisible economy from a technical standpoint and what it is that really lights your fire about these incredible people, and how you kind of got drawn into the philosophy and approach that is implied in this invisible economy.
Yeah, I think I'm still learning a lot there. Still, definitely a lot to learn on how that's all structured. But basically, I guess to be fully transparent, I didn't go into this and say I think this is going to take me 40 hours of work and this is my rate. At no point did I actually quote a price or say what I would, or say, hey, I want a percentage of the sale proceeds, or I want this, I want that. It was just the challenge seems cool to me, and all the work that I do in the DAO space or in the development space. Generally, if I'm putting a lot of effort out there and what I consider to be high quality work, and if it's resonating with people, it all ends up kind of compounding and coming back in one way or another. So whether that is actually getting paid for something, or somebody just thinking of you, and with Austin in the Build Guild, there's just ETH in there that I can withdraw if I feel I've done something valuable. He does that for all the people in the Build Guild, where there's just this stipend where do some work and you can withdraw this kind of universal basic income for doing stuff that helps the ecosystem. So it's like this kind of honor system thing, which takes care of people that are adding value without looking for traditional business relationships. That's kind of similar to my understanding of what they're building with the invisible economy, but not just developers, for artists and everything. So it's hard to get into, and you have to have a certain amount of, I guess, stability to take those leaps. But I find that anytime that it's kind of my thoughts going into a hackathon, where it's okay, do I want to spend my whole weekend on this project? And I think every single time I've done a hackathon, I've either met somebody or learned something that has completely changed my life, to put it lightly. So I always think that's my motivation, is that I think because I took on that project, now I'm doing this cool, weird NFT retreat at some castle. So I maybe I didn't get paid ETH for doing this, but now I'm here just hanging out in France, I guess. So it's a weird not business relationship that is kind of growing, and I'm curious to see how we can onboard more people to this thing where it's value is not exactly straightforward.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, I must admit that one of the best firesides we had in kernel history was with Bea and Sparrow, digging into some of these notions of what it means to have an invisible economy, which in many regards still goes fairly unnoticed, except for those who are intrinsically motivated and have the kinds of intentional approach that you've outlined, both in answer to the question of how you get into these more sort of these less permeable groups on Telegram and in build guilds and this kind of stuff, which is by putting work out there, actively engaging with the community, speaking to people, helping with them, demonstrating your knowledge, learning your way into, it's not learn to earn, it's learn to end up in a castle doing cool stuff with crazy people. That's the game I want to play, just by the way. And I think
yes, you get rewarded by the inner circles of Telegram, and I guess maybe selfishly sometimes you get more alpha channels, to use the degen words.
Sure, but that alpha is even, one of the ways that I've really always loved of describing art in general is that it is that which casts a veil over the visible. It never makes it completely visible, but the form becomes apparent for those who are looking, right? And I think that that's an idea which DADA and the invisible economy have really kind of grappled with, and which then in these really fascinating ways is reflected in the nature of the work that happens, whether it's in these artistic conversations that they have in their horizontal scrolling on their beautiful sites, or whether it's in what you've just presented to us, which is also in some very interesting way, deeply creative, right? And I wonder if at any stage in this process, it's also kind of what I was trying to unearth a little bit with you in this thing of what was the mental state in finding this bug in the contract that then leads to a new feature? Is do you have a renewed appreciation for the creativity inherent in coding after having done this kind of stuff, and a better sense of how that might be passed on so that we can scale these weird value exchanges that might happen between more people.
Yeah, I think this was a particularly inspiring one. Like a few other inspiring like experiences like that recently, where like some folks in DAOHaus, we did like a loot derivative just one like Thursday night because we thought it was fun. Loot had just come out, didn't charge anything for it, make any money, but like people just kind of picked up and started playing with it. And for me, the motivation is like when I see somebody either like using my code for a creative purpose, like a new type of DAO formation I didn't think was possible, or like kind of constructing something that I've built and just like playing with it and having fun with it. And then I actually like ran into someone in Denver with a shirt of the NFT project that we made. And like, that was just mind blowing to me that like, I had no idea this guy was doing this. And I saw this thing that I coded up in Solidity on SVGs one Thursday night. And now it's like on a shirt in front of me from some stranger because he thought it was cool. Like I want to help figure out how to create more moments like that where people have that feedback loop where they motivate themselves to the point where they put themselves out there, they try something, and then they just see other people using it, and playing with it. And even if you're not like making like royalties or money off of something, you're just seeing how it like builds the larger ecosystem. And so one of the things I'm exploring this week is like, how can you just visualize coordination more? So like, what does a DAO's voting patterns actually look like? How do members come together into cohorts to accomplish things? And like, is there anything to learn there? Because it certainly doesn't look like a traditional company org chart, and it doesn't look like, you know, probably an electrical grid. It's probably something much more organic looking, like a river or like weather patterns or something. Like I've seen some really cool drawings from some folks here that are also trying to visualize those same things. Because like systems like that, if we can't visualize them, we probably don't know how to like bring more people in and motivate them.
It really reminds me of this beautiful video, which is actually a part of the kernel syllabus by Brett Victor, where he talks about inventing on principle, and his principle being that creators ought to have direct connection, immediate connection with that which they are creating. One of the examples that he gives, which I've always loved, is like drawing electrical grids, and you know, this old school notation, the best that we could do with pencil and paper being, you know, draw a resistor as a jagged line and a light bulb as a particular, you do these kinds of things. But like, what we can do in online media is in fact use data as a subjective and creative tool. You know, so when you're drawing an electric grid, you can have a resistor there, but you ought to be able to scale up and down its resistance like dynamically as you're drawing the grid, and see what effect that has on the voltage or the ampage or various different other like aspects of what is going on there. And it's something that I'm fascinated by in this particular regard. Like yeah, like what is the like sort of organic organizational charts that is backed by data that allows us to, you know, like create with each other and collaborate with each other in this like immediate sense that Brett Victor is talking about, which is maybe like another whole guild session.
Yeah, and I think that I would want to bring in some of their DAOHaus folks at some point, that they're doing some really cool stuff with these like DAO war games where everyone kind of assumes or you don't assume in a DAO that everything's always going to be friendly, but like a lot of DAOs have so far operated in a pretty friendly way where there hasn't been like a huge contentious fork, or like that's pretty rare, except I guess the DAO with the fork and everything like that. But recently DAOs are kind of operating relatively smoothly. So what they're trying to do is like, let's make an adversarial DAO. Let's put $1,000 in the treasury and pit everyone against each other to see who can steal it. And like what emerges when actually trying to build in an adversarial system. And then like, you can just you can do that over and over again to almost have like a natural evolution of robust systems. And it's also just kind of fun because you can like, it's like a capture the flag with DAOs. So join like the Thursday DAOHaus calls if you want to play those.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really, really amazing. I love that kind of stuff. It's similar also to Ethernauts, you know, that's this like war games kind of stuff. And it's one of the points that I've been kind of hammering home for those poor souls who have been joining me in that guild, which is that like here there is some really important and kind of difficult to think of another example in history of this kind of paradigm shift where the mistakes that have happened are used as these educational opportunities. They're not swept under the carpet and like, oh, don't look here. You know, it's like, hey, look, this is how we do reentrancy, and therefore we can talk about, you know, like a checks, effects, interactions, pattern, as opposed to like whatever happened with the DAO. Before we kind of come to a close, I want to ask, you know, I mean, seen as your, you know, shadowy supercoder in some chateau in France with all of these incredible DADA people who are very, very close to us and dear in our hearts. Do you have any kinds of alpha that you might like to speak about in terms of like potential uses of flashbots or any of the other tools that you've covered in this presentation? Where do you see this stuff going to in the next year or two?
I think something that a lot of people that in this space talk about is retroactive public goods funding. Ever since ETCC in France, where I think like Vitalik on stage was like talking about a lot of public goods funding, and there was that whole like EIP 1559 retroactive public goods funding where the NFT sale where the proceeds went to people that helped make that happen. I think like try to look for significant projects or ambitious projects, even if they can't necessarily like, if you have the freedom to and time to work on just projects with people that are value aligned. I think people are more and more going to start doing these things where if you like work on something that has a significant contribution, you will probably see outsized rewards from it. Haven't seen one of those yet myself, but that's kind of one of my philosophies where it's like, hey, if I just try to make a big impact, like, okay, I'm going to work on, try to get as many people like, try to improve the Moloch DAO framework and work on this stuff. And like, not just because maybe someday in the future you'll get a payday, but also like this is a really cool time to be part of shaping like DAO summer people thought was this summer, but it's probably not. Like the building blocks now are going to shape like a really crazy time in crypto probably. So yeah, DAO tooling is kind of where it's at. Maybe I'll be back talking about Zodiac in a couple of weeks. So
yeah, definitely. You're probably going to be back every day after this. Careful what you wish for. Can I just one follow-up question on that is like in your own life and work, how do you measure significance? Like when you say like find a significant project, like what kind of metrics do you have internally and also just in terms of your own like goals and intentions that would help you kind of figure that out?
I both like and am terrified of seeing money run through code that I've written. Like when I did like the minion safe with Deacon at DAOHaus, and a week later there was a DAO that put like 1,020 ETH into it, and I was like nearly positive. I tested every code path, but like I was still on a flight, like frantically, making sure that I tested that it couldn't be like, you know, initialized twice or like that, like there wasn't a way to steal the money. Then my battery died and I was like freaking out the whole way home. Like those moments like that, I kind of hate them and love them. So I just feel like if I'm having moments like that, that's pretty cool. Where I know that like if I mess up, it's like pretty high stakes. So I just kind of respond to that a bit. But I think what I like better than that is like those moments where you see someone wearing a shirt of something you made. So seeing people like play and compose with your stuff is cool. Like I was actually talking to Amin from, you know, everything, Moloch DAO, Spank Chain and everything, talking to him at Denver. And he was just kind of talking about how some of the early code that he wrote for like Spank Chain or like other things or at Consensus early on ended up being like cornerstones of pretty important like major things in like DeFi drop or token structures and stuff like that. And I think that I kind of saw that in him as well, where he seemed to feel really, I don't know, like I'm just probably projecting, but it seemed like it was rewarding to see how stuff that you put out there now is just going to get reshaped and reused and possibly used in something that impacts a lot of people down the road. So I think like that's like what I optimize for.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's really, really cool. It reminds me that's, there's these really important kind of proxy metrics for pro-social environments, which have to do with like time spent together, time spent talking positively, but like most importantly, time spent in like highly charged situations together. It's like one of the most interesting pro-social game metrics that you can do. And like I kind of feel that like if Ethereum is the social network and it's all about the good vibes and the friends that you make along the way anyway, then this particular thing that you've unearthed for us here is a really interesting one of like seeing people play with the things that you do, having a long perspective of the time over which the stuff operates, and kind of like honing and fine-tuning one's skill and attention in these high stakes games.
Yeah,
it's really a wonderful way of thinking.
I guess
it's beautiful.
Final thing would be always have full test coverage on your contracts before going to mainnet, like full 100% and branching. Test every revert and make your tests readable and legible by other people. There is no excuse. You'll hate yourself if you don't. So
Isaac, thank you so much. We certainly love you. I know that the DADA people do too. It's been really, really wonderful to have you. And I'm incredibly appreciative that you're willing to give us both your time and expertise in this kind of setting.
Thanks. But I mean, honestly, this is one of those classic experiences where like you say yes to this, and I'm sure one of you will reach out with a really cool idea. So like these are the types of things that you should say yes to.
There we go. We'll just end there. Just say yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks.